we're going to move on now to Kina. Kina, would you like to take away your presentation? This is an end-to-end UX UI project with BizMiner.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kina. Thank you to our panelists today for coming in. I know I've really enjoyed hearing your feedback so far, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on mine as well. So a little bit about me before we get into things. I recently graduated from Indiana University, where I studied marketing and creative writing. And that was really where I first learned to leverage data to craft compelling stories and user experiences. And so today I'll be sharing my design process and solutions for a project that I completed with BizMiner, focused on simplifying granular selection processes for business professionals. So a little bit of context about this project. This was a client project conducted over 12 weeks with research done in a team of 12 UX students via Harness projects from September to November of 2022. And then in March of 2023, I was able to continue building upon those initial iterations in collaboration with the BizMiner team. So in addition to working with the CEO and VP of product, I was also able to work with developers, client relations, and marketing and sales. So a little bit about BizMiner. BizMiner is a leading online provider of industry financial analysis and market research. So they have thousands of users, including business consultants, brokers, accountants, small business development centers, as well as students from financial and academic institutions. And what they're really best known for is the freshness and granularity of their data. So they've had very high retention over the past 20 years of business. However, historically, growth has been a challenge for them. And that's something that we really learned and got to dive into with our stakeholders, the CEO and VP of BizMiner, when we met with them. So we learned that after relaunching in June of 2022, legacy users had issues with the new interface. This is a quote from the CEO of BizMiner. He said, "We have the data, they want the data, but how do we make it easy to find and available for them?" And that was really the how might we that guided a lot of my initial research and ideation, as well as the initial ideas for outcomes of success. So that was to reduce the average session duration and also to increase the returns to the website. So that follows the logic of the quicker a user is able to access a product, the more satisfied and inclined they would be to return and use the product again. So in order to learn a little bit more about the industry intelligence provider space, and also keeping in mind that BizMiner users are often using BizMiner in conjunction with other industry intelligence providers, I conducted a competitive analysis to better understand what was successful in the space thus far and what was currently being used. And I quickly learned that that granularity value proposition that BizMiner had was kind of a double-edged sword for them, because looking at their competitors, I looked at Vertical IQ, First Research, and IBISWorld. And for all of them, the reports and the data was all pre-made. So users just had to go on their site, select an industry, and in IBISWorld's case, also select a country, and then the report was ready to go for them. It was ready-made. It's kind of like if you go to the grocery store and you go to the ready-made meals aisle, you can just pick it up right off the shelf. Versus for BizMiner, you can see they have all these other parameters to consider. And what the users are really doing is they're picking out all the ingredients and then giving them to BizMiner to cook and make a freshly generated report. And so the data is customized and fresh, and therefore higher quality, but it takes a lot more time to get to that point. So after seeing how granularity was impacting just the overarching user task flows, I wanted to speak to users and better understand how that granularity was playing a role in their lived experience of the new website. And so the team was able to speak to 9 current BizMiner users, and we asked them questions like, asking about what their current role is with their work and how BizMiner is involved with that, what kind of use cases they have for BizMiner, and what other platforms they're using in conjunction with BizMiner. And the question that we asked that really got a lot of really meaty feedback was that we'd asked them to walk us through a typical visit to the site for them. And at that point, they would essentially get into an impromptu usability test. They would share screen and then just start calling out everything that was affecting their experience. It was amazing and also very overstimulating at times. And so because we collected so much data from that, we did conduct affinity mapping to synthesize our learnings. And from that, I was able to identify 3 key themes. So the first one was the less clicks, the better. That seemed kind of obvious, but in terms of practice, what that meant was things like the sidebar popping out was very distracting to users. When users would go into the dropdown to click on a specific industry, the dropdown would not disappear. And so they would have to click outside of the dropdown in order for it to go away. And they found that to be very unintuitive. When selecting their business structure, it would auto select to industry firms. And then if a user wanted to select the second option, sometimes the previous options would reset. And that was, as you can imagine, very frustrating for users to have to start over their selection process. The next key theme that emerged was that users are really set on staying informed along the way. So they want to know as early as possible if a selection is not going to generate enough data to create a profile. And so they get frustrated because, as you can see here, this dropdown shows disabled options, which would suggest that whatever you choose, there's going to be enough data to create a report for it. However, then they would still get this insufficient data notification and be like, what's happening? I thought that, I was good to go. And then to stay informed, they would also do workarounds like pull up the Nixcode website, where they would read and learn more about the different industries to figure out which one they needed for their selection. And then they would store a lot of information about what selections they needed to make for each parameter in Excel spreadsheets to help them go faster through the process once they were actually on the BizMiner site, which obviously is like a hassle and not something that they should have to do just to go through the selection process. And finally, the last key theme that emerged was that accessibility issues were just amplifying all of these pain points so much, because things like not being able to really read the text that well, like lack of color contrast, it just causes even more frustration to the existing frustration and aggravation with having to start over or slow loading times for being able to access the report. The unclear subject hierarchy of the dropdown was also a really critical issue that was causing people to not be clear on if they were selecting a sector or what fell under a sector versus an industry. And then again, this insufficient data notification was the same color as this button overlapping it. And so that just made it even harder for them to notice that they did not have enough data to generate a report. And so these 3 themes really led to one conclusion, which is that frustrating UX in one product was deterring users from trying other products. The users that we interviewed, they all said that they really were only familiar with 1 or maybe 2 of the products that BizMiner had out of the 7 different services. And when asked if they were interested in trying those other products, they said, oh, like, I don't really know if it's worth the hassle. Like, it'll probably help me like to get my stuff done when I need it to, but it's just not worth it to learn and onboard with a new product if this existing product that I learned took so much time to figure out. And in addition to that, 4 of the 9 firms interviewed said that they were looking to replace BizMiner because of these UX problems that they were facing. So when testing design concepts and going into ideation, I really wanted to consider how to make the site more intuitive, more easy to navigate, especially since many users expressed to us that they felt kind of low tech savvy, and how emphasizing to us how long it took just to, adjust to all of these different recent changes that were being made. So my initial approach was very blue sky. I was trying to just do a catch-all of everything that the users had told us and address as much as I could at once. So I took on 3 different flows, being onboarding, the selection process, and also post-selection when they access the product. But after speaking with the BizMiner team about this, with the CEO and VP of product, as well as with development and client relations, it was very clear that the users are going to need more time to adapt. This is a lot of stuff to tackle at once, and we need to think about what's most relevant to reducing the average session duration and making it more efficient of a user flow for them, and leaving the users more satisfied and therefore willing to return. So when thinking about that, it was very clear to me that based on user feedback, the heart of the issues was with the data filtering process. That was where a lot of users would be dropping off in terms of exhaustion. And so that was what needed to be tackled first. So looking more closely at my first iteration of the blue sky approach, there were a couple different points of feedback. Firstly, that using this progress bars type setting, while it was more clear what each next step would be, then users were not able to see previous selections. So they wouldn't be able to see what industry they had already selected and what structure they'd already selected when they're on the market area step. And that lends for less flexibility than in the existing website. Another issue that came up was that one of the stats that users used to make selection decisions was the number of firms analyzed. But another stat that they also used was the recent report year revenue, which I had discarded because I hadn't heard that much feedback about it during user interviews. However, after speaking with client relations, it was very clear that that is another important statistic that users were using to make their selection decisions. And it should be preserved in the design. In terms of feasibility, there were a couple of points of feedback from development. So for example, this market area responsive map was something that users proposed as something that could be helpful to them in understanding what firms were analyzed that were out there. But just from a feasibility and like opportunity cost standpoint of like how long it would take to create this versus how much response of satisfaction users would get from it, it just is something to table or consider for a later time, because it's just not as relevant as the current pain points. And lastly, the sidebar over here was considered redundant because while some of the original links were relocated to the top bar, some were still here, and maybe that could cause confusion in terms of what was relocated and what wasn't. So a couple of improvements that I wanted to highlight within my final designs. The old design had a very poor drop-down hierarchy, and so I wanted to clarify that a bit by not only giving more space, but also adding these carrots, reminiscent of the Mixcode website that users had already cited that they had used and were familiar with. So this carrot design should hopefully be familiar to them and therefore easier to adapt to when going through the drop downs. The next improvement that I made was moving the business structure to step 2, because in the original setup, having structure toward the end, users would select the other option. There were 2 options for structure, and they would select the other option, and then that would reset their previous selections. So preventing that from happening by putting structure as a parameter to select toward the beginning would help to go from broad to narrow and prevent users from having to restart their whole selection process. The next improvement had to do with status visibility and error prevention. So in the old design, users kept missing that they were getting an insufficient data notification, and that caused frustration because they'd finished making their selections and then find out they couldn't access the product. And so with these stats cards, making the color a disabled gray should help in clarifying that something has changed and that you need to go back and make a different selection. And finally, relocation of sidebar links. So here you can see how the sidebar was popping out to show their labels, and users would get annoyed with that frequently popping out. And so relocating everything to the top navigation and giving more space for their selections to breathe should hopefully help ease some anxiety during the selection process. So in terms of final solution and designs, this is a work in progress, as all final designs are. But just a quick look at how all of my feedback and iterations impacted final designs. I really wanted to take an atomic design approach. And so I just looked at these specific elements that would really make a big impact on the user's experience, and just kind of went from there. So here you can see how the drill down can come into effect. And then selecting structure that's already set for them. And then going into market area, let's say this is a walkthrough of what it would look like for a user to see their order summary coming up. They can see that they can't access the product yet, but they can see the stats available to them. And then finally, time series. Let's say they chose 3 years instead of 5. Oop, like their disabled card now has come up and everything's grayed out. They can't access anything. You need to go back. And now you can finally access the product. So in terms of what I learned and took away from this project, first and foremost was that thoughtful design includes consideration for implementation. As important as exploring all those different blue sky options was, realistically, you have to think about next steps for users. And in the case of BizMiner, users had just gone through this huge relaunch in June 2022 and had taken so much time to figure out onboarding for that. So there's no need to give your users onboarding whiplash and throw something again like completely new at them. And then the other big takeaway that I had was kind of related in putting out those important and urgent fires first. I actually used an Eisenhower matrix to figure out what was most critical to tackle. And so what I also learned from that exercise was that the next thing that users had a lot of issues with was how the product was being accessed and desire for a dashboard for organization of their products. And so that would be my recommendation for next steps. Thank you so much for listening, and please feel free to ask any questions at this time.
Awesome, Kina. Thanks so much for taking us through that. That was great as well. I'm blown away by all three of you, to be honest. It's so good to see. Over to the mentors and panelists for feedback.
I have been so excited to talk for like the last 5 minutes. You don't even understand. Kina, you did. I need to applaud you because you did the impossible. You made me care about a report creator for business. You made me care about that, which historically would not be something that I care about. So great job. You have a fantastic presence while presenting. I honestly, so many of my notes start with a capital LOVE. So I love this, I love that, and I will send you all those little notes. I won't take up everybody's time to talk through all of them, but you did so much right in this presentation, and so did all the other presenters as well. You guys all did so great. But so like I wrote down that like I loved seeing that you found workarounds for like what your users were currently doing. I am also very familiar with users using workarounds in order to use our products. So I know how useful it is whenever users bring those things up. And I love that you included it in your presentation. And I love that you also talked about the blue sky approach and how you had to like rein it back, and you had really good reasons for doing that. And I think this is always a sort of game that we have to play in our field, where like we want to do so much and we want to fix things, but we don't want to, you know, get into this waterfall approach, or we don't want to freak our users out too much by changing things abruptly. So I love that you have that context and you've given it here. Also love that you talked through feedback with development and like say usability and stuff, because that's really going to happen in all your jobs. So it's really great to know that you have experience, you know, making constellations with those groups. And I love that you brought in heuristics throughout here. If there was only one piece of feedback, it's not even about your presentation. It's actually just a piece of design feedback. I was kind of curious, how might we give some indication of what can be changed to recover from errors? You know, when you have it's grayed out with the insufficient data, is there like a way that we can recover from that? And that was just kind of like a design thing that popped into my head. But overall, such a great presentation, and I cannot believe you made me care. Awesome job.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Honestly, before I started this project, I was skeptical about if I could come to care so much about as well about like a fintech service. But yeah, I learned a lot, and I think speaking to the users was so important to that piece of caring and being passionate about helping them get through this process, because it is very, very nitty-gritty.
Great. Natalie, take it away.
So this might not be particularly actionable feedback, but I wanted to put it out there anyway. In that, what I loved about this presentation is that you took something that was very complicated. You took two somethings that were very complicated, right? The BizMiner product itself, which was complicated, and then also your entire process, which was complicated. And you made both of those things seem and feel simple. And like, that's what I think makes for a great case study and a great presentation like this, is taking these complicated, complex things that you're doing. Like design work and research is really complicated in a lot of ways. And you were able to present it just so simply and make it feel so easy. And I don't know how you did that exactly. Like it feels like sorcery having watched this. But for like the people who are observing and viewing this webinar, like I think one of the key things to strive to do is to take that complicated thing and make it easy, however method you use to do that. So I love that. I just like Becca, like my notes are all like a little heart instead of a bullet space. It's like, I love this thing. I love this thing. Like I really liked that you broke things down into themes. That makes it easy for the people, like your audience, to know what you're talking about and follow along. I love that you anchored your things to data. So like you threw out there that 44% of people were looking to replace BizMiner. Like anchoring these problems and anchoring your next steps in small pieces of data like that was amazing. And I like that you at least like you did a good balance of, I want to focus on the biggest pain point. I want to focus on the thing that is really messing with people and really screwing them up. Maybe that's not what we're going to be able to work on first as an engineering team or as like a product management team, but you highlighted like, here's the big problem that we need to solve. And then, like Becca said, you figured out how to make that feasible or how to like chunk that into things that the rest of the product team can work on. Because like as a researcher, I'm sure that our designers on the panel also have this. Turns out we can't always fix what we want in the order in which we want to, or at the speed at which we want to change them. And even though one of my favorite phrases is anything is possible with enough engineers, that has almost never been true. So you always have to make compromises.
Thanks, Chad. Over to you. Thanks, Natalie. That was great.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Natalie.
I have 3 loves in my bullet points too. I just realized that right now. I right off the gate when you told me about BizMiner, I love that. I mean, like, and a little confused in the problem. You mentioned the problem was reducing average session duration time, increasing the number of returns to site. Again, you know, that doesn't tell you, that's not a true problem. That's more of a business metrics, right? You could glean maybe if you improve that, or if they were down, there might be a problem there. But I'd prefer to see, like, to understand a little bit more into what the actual problems were, which is basically usability issues. I love the insights from the competitive analysis. I loved how you dove into the user behaviors and the differences between each. That was amazing. Just a quick little nitpick, and just things to watch out for, because I've seen it before and I've been called out on it, is you said your team, but then in the bullet points you said I, and this was, I think, on the usability interview slide or the user interview slide. So like, who was doing the work? Was it we or was it you? So just make sure you clarify that. You will get called out on that. I love the explanation of the learnings from the usability test. I love how you show the workaround part. That was really cool, right? It's funny because, like, we as UX designers always like, hey, if people have like post notes about notes and that kind of thing and how to do workarounds, like, that's obviously where the interface and the software is failing to do its job, right? So that's really cool that you showed those workarounds. I was hoping that you were going to show, or that I was hoping that you were going to tell me that you let the business know the importance of the workarounds, right? Because I know you know it, right? And it'd be really cool that if you let the business know that, hey, the reason why these workarounds are important is because of X, Y, and Z. I loved how you put in the metrics, just like Natalie had mentioned. I love the metrics. Frustrating UX in one product deters user from trying others. 40% of the firms interviewed are looking to replace BizMiner. Super cool, right? That's like, it paints the picture even better. One part that was a little confusing to me, it was when you were walking me through your first iteration, and you just sat there and kind of told me all the things that you designed that didn't work. I mean, it's cool. I understand that some things are not going to, like, designs are not going to work when you test them. Like, you learn some things from the usability testing and you made a design iteration, but then most of the stuff in that first iteration was wrong, it seemed like. I'm not sure if I'd go through that 100%. I would basically say, you know, the first iteration I learned a lot in here, just a few things I learned, but I wouldn't go through all the details of kind of what was wrong with your first iteration, because that's really like your first time trying to solve the problem. I'd just probably go through a few. Oh, and then in the improvements section, I got tripped up. I don't know why I got tripped up on this. You had labeled the old design, and then you had iteration 2, but then you had improvement 1, improvement 2, and improvement 3. I would just leave it at improvement 1, 2, and 3 at the top, and it's just old and new. Just sorry, little nitpicks. I see all the details. Otherwise, I think it was really, really good, and I kind of play around in the space at work, so you didn't have any worries about impressing me, like, in terms of the space, because I work in this kind of space all the time. So great job.
Yeah, thank you, Chad, and yeah, thank you, Rebecca and Natalie as well. Yeah, no worries on the nitpicking. I mean, I was gonna say, I hope you guys like eviscerate me after this, because I'll just, you know, have so much to learn from there. So I appreciate every comment as well.
It was a beautiful presentation, and yeah, if the only evisceration is potentially that it was a little unclear what was original and what was new at any given point, but other than that, you did such a great job.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kina. Thanks for the feedback panel. We're going to transition into a Q&A section for the last 15 minutes. I also want to invite Kina, Laura, Kate, if you have questions that have come to mind while you've been listening, feel free to ask them as well. Everyone can learn from these questions. So what I'll do is I'll go through what we have in the Q&A panel. I might cover some of the answered questions that were answered by a text as well, so that everyone can get that information. So feel free to get your questions in. I'm going to start off with there's two questions that cover similar areas just around design metrics. So this is to the whole panel. When talking about metrics, what are some UX design metrics that can be measured? And if a project focuses on only one metric, can it include more than one? There is a follow-up question to this. It may be from the same person. What if we didn't establish the UX design metrics at the beginning, but now want to measure them after completing the project? Is this feasible, meaningful? Who would like to have a go at addressing some of these questions around metrics? Chat, sure.
So you have to discern between so there are UX metrics and then there's business metrics, right? And so UX metrics are more behavioral in nature, and then business metrics are more like monetary, and you could maybe even glean the conversion rates might be kind of like business metrics. So I would sorry, someone's calling me right this moment. So I would make sure you differentiate between those two things, because they do matter, right? I find that for me, this is gonna be a long answer for not answering the question directly, but UX metrics are very hard to measure. I haven't seen a team do it really well, right? And basically to prove out, how we can actually measure UX improvements. So relying on conversion rates and relying on abandonment rates and relying on increased number of returns to site are usually what I've seen UX teams and UX designers resort to. But that we are finding that the UX space is moving more towards kind of UX metrics like customer experience outcomes. I've seen instances of system usability scales, SUS scores. You can benchmark all kinds of different ones that you could do. And then I think the last question is showing the difference. I know I said that before, I'd love to see the delta before and after, but I think anytime you can show, anytime you could measure an improvement by metrics after is always going to help out validate your design, right? I can say this is better, but if I can actually prove it with numbers, it kind of aligns more with a scientific method to actually validate you actually made a better improvement. Hopefully that helps. I think I skated around the answer or the questions.
No, that was great. Thanks, Chad. Any other comments, Natalie?
I think I tend to, it's a great question. I think I tend to anchor on kind of backing myself into a metric by thinking about, okay, how are we going to show whether someone is having a good or bad experience with this thing? How would I, not even thinking initially about a metric, but just as a person in the world, how would I want someone to show me that Kina has had a good experience with this versus a bad experience with this? And that could be, things like a referral rate that we can infer that if someone is referring their friends to a product, they're probably having a good experience. We can infer from sentiment ratings that people are having a good or bad experience. A lot of UX and a lot of behavior, we have to go based on inference because people can't be explicit about some of these things, or we don't have the time or the resources to explicitly ask them about a lot of this. But I'm always thinking about, how would I go to my CEO and try to explain to him, people are having a good experience and here's how we know it? Is it, I worked for a social media company, so it's is it engagement, however we might want to describe that? If one of the things I'm working on right now is helping develop some trust and safety measures to look at actually quantifying bad experiences, like receiving spam or, having fraud come up, or bullying and harassment on a platform, thinking about what are the things that people might be experiencing on your product that would be bad is also a way to measure a UX outcome. I don't know if that answered it either. I think Chad and I both kind of walked around it. Metrics are complicated, y'all.
It's doable. It's doable. It's always been a problem I've always like advocated for us to solve as a UX space, because it's like, how can you measure? Because you need to tell the business, hey, the business is looking at you as like, why do we hire UX designers? Why do we have a huge UX team of 80 designers? What are they doing? Right? All they know is numbers, right? That's usually how businesses work, right? And so they're trying to like, if you can prove that the outcome of your efforts is improving something, some metric, then it then validates your existence and validates you're improving the customer's experience.
And I would add to that like benchmarking, like showing the before and after, really important. Like
Huge.
It's really cool to show, oh, X% of our users are doing this, or like Y% of our users are having this experience. But like, that's a snapshot in time. And it's hard to make a decision based on just a snapshot in time. Being able to show the before and after, collecting your data over time, being able to benchmark it in some way is like super important. I came to the tech world accidentally after studying developmental psychology. So like I have a huge bias for like, show me the longitudinal data. Like you can't show me change over time if we're not using multiple time points of data actually. So like, as soon as you think something might be relevant to a project, to a business, see if there's a way to start tracking that metric and start collecting that data, even if it's like, even if you're not doing it on a rolling constant basis, if you can do like I'm going to run this survey or this usability or like whatever it is, I'm going to do this month. And then in 2 months, I'm going to do it again and have a second time point. And then in 6 months, I'm going to do it again and have a third time point. And you can show change over time. Like that's, you know, the juice is worth the squeeze on that one.
Thanks, Natalie. I think that was a great response to that question. After all, there's plenty of great stuff to dive into for everyone. Next question. We've got one from Anonymous on, when conducting or presenting usability testing, what does the hiring manager aim to learn or understand from this aspect of the presentation? Who would like to take our usability testing theme?
I was just going to say, I think Natalie's probably the best to answer that.
So the things that I look at the most in usability testing is like, what is working really well? And these aren't necessarily things that you can directly measure, right? I'm not going to necessarily be able to throw this on a dashboard and like show the PM, like, look, the line's moving this way. But in a usability test, like I can show, you know, video clips, I can include quotes, I can talk about how long it took them to successfully finish this task. Or one of my favorites is, this is how long it took them to fail at the task, which is to mean like they worked on it for this long, couldn't get there, gave up and abandoned trying. One of my other favorites is, this is how long it took them to get to a point where they thought they successfully finished the tasks, but they actually didn't. And so like, for me, usability tests is like, it's great to show what things are working smoothly and what things are working well. But I always look at a usability test as, here are all the things that are broken that is going to make this user want to throw their computer or their phone or whatever across the room and yell expletives about our company. Like finding those frustration points, finding the pain points is why we do the usability testing, because yeah, it's good to know what's going well and like can try to replicate what's going well about something, but it's more important to fix the things that are broken than it is to keep building. Well, I think it's more important to fix things that are broken than to keep building out things that are already working well. Great.
Thanks, Natalie. Any other points on that? Shall we move on? Cool. All right. So I'm just going to that's all for the new questions, but I'm going to cover some of the questions we answered via text, just in case people didn't get a chance to see this. So I'll just go through the list really briefly. There was a question on how Kate was able to find the company to work with, so to speak, in this case. So this is just part of the Harness Project's Career Launcher program. We include projects as part of the training program. So if you are struggling to get access to a project, you can get one through our program. Scrolling down. There was a question earlier on from Liz around to the senior designers asking if this showcase is an example of how to run through take-home tasks. There was a follow-up question after this about the difference between this, what we're showing today, versus your portfolio. And we answered that there is a difference. Obviously, this is a slide-based format where you're presenting up to 40 minutes if it's 3 case studies, whereas your portfolio is more used in your job application process. So that was just to clarify the differences between the two, and that it is important to have both. So the next question.
I just talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, Becky.
Yeah, so the difference between, it's going to vary. So there's a kind of hook for your portfolio, your digital online portfolio. You want to hook people and get them interested in your project, and you also do want to provide them with a lot of the context that you'd have, potentially, like even going so far as to have a full case study on your site where you give all this relevant information, potentially even more than you're presenting. But like really the job of your digital portfolio is just to hook the right people and get them interested in you, and then give them more once you're presenting to them in your interviews, because nobody really wants to read something and then get presented to it in the exact same way. It's kind of unavoidable sometimes, so you don't have to feel bad if it's very similar between the two, but it can be pretty similar. I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, so your digital portfolio should have almost everything that you're going over in your presentation.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, moving on, just final couple ones. We have a question here on if the recording will be shared. Yes, so we will be preparing a recording of this session and we'll send it out via email. By the end of the week, we'll most likely get it out. You can also follow us on our YouTube channel if you want a notification for the recording. Just one question that was asked earlier, just around the differences between a UX research and a UX design portfolio. So if we're thinking about this more from the portfolio point of view, what are the major differences in terms of what you're looking for as hiring managers? If someone brings, say, a research project, what are some of the themes you're looking for from that candidate in a research type project versus, say, a more design focused project? Chad.
I would say like someone like me, which is I'm a senior UX designer, I probably wouldn't be looking at a research portfolio. I probably won't be doing that, right? We have a research team that does that, right? If I'm in a smaller organization, then I would be forced to do that. Then, quite honestly, I'd be looking at, because I'm not a UX researcher by trade, I'd be looking for some key things that I've learned, right? Have they done usability testing? Are they gleaning insights? Are they understanding and providing recommendations, and so forth? That's what I'd be looking for. From a UX design portfolio, I would be looking at if they can understand the problem, right? Define the problem. Then how did they go about solving that problem? Right? And that includes everything from interaction design to usability testing, if you have the skills and the chops and you didn't have the resources to have a researcher to help you out. And then I would also be looking at the detail. I want to learn about the behaviors. I want to learn the nitty gritty about the space that you're working in, right? Because that's really what it takes. Like, you have to dive deep and know it like the back of your hand. And I want to see them uncover those key insights and kind of what the troubles they went through, the ambiguity they went through, and how they come out with a clean solution. So those are some of the high level things I'd be looking for.
Thanks, Chad. Any final comments? Otherwise, we will wrap up shortly. Natalie.
I think wherever possible, and this is a task, so like brace yourself. For a research portfolio, for research case studies, I think one of the things that's really underrepresented right now, but is really, really important when I'm like looking at them as a hiring manager, is trying to see what your stakeholder management looks like and what your relationships look like and how you're using research within your company or within your experience to build those relationships with your design team, with your PM team, with your engineering team, how you're managing their expectations and like setting timelines and talking about what is feasible and is not feasible within a single research project, or why something might be approached with a survey versus qualitative, like what methods are most appropriate. Because like I on an almost daily basis, I think someone on my team, either me or some other researcher, has someone come to them and say like, hey nerd, go run a survey on this and answer these questions for us. And it's like, these questions aren't appropriate for a survey. Like I'm gonna have to spend several weeks interviewing a couple dozen people to actually really get into this and be able to ask detailed questions and follow-ups. And so like a huge part of your job as a researcher, I'm sure it's true as a designer as well, but I have no firsthand experience, is managing those stakeholders. And so as much as you can embed that into your portfolio and your case studies, it's really going to give you a leg up when it comes to the hiring process.
+1 on the design side too. That's 100%. And Amazon, that's 100% true.
Great. Thanks so much. This has been an awesome session. I want to thank Kina, Kate, and Laura for your amazing presentations. I mean, really, really good work. It was top quality. So you should all be very proud of that work, and we wish you all the best as you continue your job search. Natalie, Rebecca, Chad, thanks again for your great feedback, your insights. I'm sure the attendees have learned a lot from your presence here. And yeah, we'll see you all at the next one. Thanks a lot. Enjoy your evening.